Well, welcome everyone to the third webinar that we've had in this series. This one is about the Water Sensitive Cities Index and Transition Dynamics Framework, part 2. So last week, if you tuned in, we had Katie Hammer talk about the tool and how it works and a bit of a background on it. And we had 2 case studies, one from Julia Barnes and Alan Benson from Water New South Wales, and one from Jeffrey Smith and his team out in Blue Mountain City Council. So today is a little bit different in that because we already had all the background, we just have, it's all case studies today, which is very exciting. So we get to learn about how everyone's kind of implemented or gone through the process or whatever they've thought was the most interesting part of going through the process of going through the index and the TDF. So first up, we have David from Hornsby Shire Council, and then we'll have Jan, without Emma, unfortunately, because of technical issues from the Illawarra Shoalhaven, Christy Good from Blacktown, and then Liam from Bendigo. We are trying to keep all the examples in New South Wales, but we were lacking in regional examples, which I think is very important. So Liam has kindly offered to help us out today. So special thanks to Liam for the last minute help as well to give us some regional perspectives on how they've implemented their index. Just a little bit of housekeeping, so I'll mute everyone, which I've done, except for at the end when we're going to have question time. So we'll save the questions at the end, but we will use the chat function during the presentations for questions. So yeah, have any questions or want to just make a comment or whatever, just put it in the chat and everyone can monitor that and see that. And also I'm recording the webinar. So if you do not want your video recorded, just stop your video. And that's it from me for now. I will stop sharing my screen and I'll hand straight over to David.
Thank you. Just 1 second. So can you see that?
Yes.
Yes? Okay, great. Okay. Yeah, as Beth said, it's so case studies today. So I'm just going to give you a bit of an oversight of the journey that Hornsby's gone through in the last year and a half in developing
David,
did anyone else? Yeah.
Largely bushland, 70% bushland, including a lot of national parks, up to 50,000 hectares, and bounded on the north and the east by Hawkesbury River and a number of other pretty significant waterways, Browra Creek and Cowan Creek. Got about 100.
David, we can't hear you.
Thoughts we actually took on board.
David, sorry, you seem to be cutting in and out a little bit.
Do I?
Yeah. Are you using a headset or anything?
I've got a headset on. I think it's just, I have had some problems in the past with Zoom. Is that okay?
Okay. It is now. It just seems to be cutting out for about 10 seconds at a time, kind of here and there.
If it keeps doing it, maybe I'll stop and I can, because I'm working on VM, like virtualware, and maybe I could stop and I could go into a different system and let someone else present.
Okay. Let's keep going for now and see how it goes.
We'll keep going. Okay. So as part of this process, we actually took a grant from the state government to prepare different supporting documents for our local strategic planning statement. One of those was
all right, you're cutting in and out still.
some which were new, like the urban forest strategy.
David, sorry, you're still cutting in and out.
Okay, I'll come in on a different platform if you want to let someone else present now.
Sure, if you want to stop sharing your screen.
Yep.
Jan, are you ready to jump in?
Sorry about that.
That's okay.
Yep, I'm ready to go.
Awesome.
Okay, just get sharing. It's always fun, this technology, isn't it? We think we've got it all covered and then suddenly you go, my headset's not working. Okay, let me see if I can share the right screen. No, that's an Excel spreadsheet. Is that, can you see my PowerPoint?
Yep.
Oh, sorry. Okay, just a second. Okay. I'm sorry, I'm actually having trouble seeing what I'm showing, what I'm presenting.
No, I think you can see a big document there, Jan. Probably not going to put that up.
That's what I'm just looking at, quickly closing everything
close
down.
that one down.
How about I stop sharing for a second? Start again. Okay, goodbye. Okay. No, sorry, I thought I was all ready to go, but this is, thanks Jamie for your tutelage.
Oh, no problems, Jan. Happy to help. That's what CRC is here to do.
Such a professional webinar so far. Hang on a second. Let me see how I can try it again. It's weird. I've got it here and it's not letting me go.
Oh, look, while you do that, I'll do a bit of shameless CRC advertising. People might have seen that the CRC conference is on in March next year. I've got tickets will go on sale tomorrow, hopefully. So watch out in your inboxes for that. March 15 through 18. And we'll be having activities in Sydney and other states, as well as an online component as well. So watch out for that. Looks like you're good to go there, Jen.
Is it good to it? Because all I can see is the very little meeting controls. I can't actually see what you can see.
We can see your PowerPoint presentation.
Awesome. And it sort of won't let me go into presentation mode. So I'm just going to scroll through as I've got. So, sorry. Hello everybody, I'm Jan and I work for a company called Mosaic Insights, and I have been working as a council worker. I worked for 20 years or so in Inner West Council, or in councils in the Inner West, and have had a long partnership with the CRC for water sensitive cities from its inception. And so I'm really interested in the application of the tools and the learnings that have come from that. So I was lucky enough in this role to be able to work with the Water Sensitive Cities Index and the Transition Dynamic Framework with my colleague Fiona Chandler from Alluvium. And we have been privileged to be able to work with councils on this side of the fence in helping them work through their water sensitive cities journey. So I was to be co-presenting with Emma, but she's locked out with Zoom. Emma Struess is from Wollongong Council and has been seconded to the Illawarra Shoalhaven Joint Organisation to help them in their enabling water sensitive cities communities in the regional areas of Kiama, Shoalhaven, Shell Harbour and Wollongong. So they had a pretty tight budget, as most of us know. Budgets are always tight for some of this work, and they had a small amount of funding that they carved off from a grant that they received. So they decided that what they really needed to do was just get a bit of an understanding of where they were all at. So Emma was the driving force behind this. The joint regional councils put together a grant application that outlined a vision, and they embarked on this journey. And so we, Alluvium had done a couple of other regional benchmarking workshops, and so had some experience, but that was in the face-to-face world. And so I guess what I'm talking about today is the process that we undertook, the challenges, I guess, of working across regions, but also the benefits of working across the regions. So you know what the Water Sensitive Cities Index does. It measures the urban water indicators across 7 goals and 34 indicators across those areas. Our method with regions is really about focusing on how can the region and the process that's applied to the region give benefit to the individual councils, as well as identify what the region needs as a whole. So it's the same sort of benefits that happen from an individual council, in that you get a benchmark performance against the 7 goals of a water sensitive city, but you're able to articulate that higher level shared vision of a water sensitive city, assist individual councils think about and understand their gaps and what their priorities might be, collaborate across the region on something that perhaps individuals might have done, but you're gathering more people across the region to think about their role in the region. So it's an individual role, their team role, their department role, the council role, and the regional role. It helps to really expand awareness of water sensitive cities for those councils that might be quite under-resourced, and to think about what opportunities there are to share. Stimulates discussion, of course, and as I said, it focuses on that whole of region council, the team and the individual, and what actions could be taken. So we were working on running the benchmarking workshop for all 4 councils and the ISJO as a whole. The ISJO is the Illawarra Shoalhaven Joint Organisation. And then we ran the Transition Dynamic Framework just with the region across the Illawarra Shoalhaven. So the really important thing that we found we had, particularly with this region, they had already set a vision, and that was that they wanted to enable water sensitive communities. So they wanted to build regional adaptation to climate change, increase the uptake and success of water sensitive urban design systems, reduce the pressure on urban development places and on catchment streams and coastal lagoons, and coordination and collaboration was a big focus, but particularly building the capacity. One of the things that we found was that the priority in the early days was to really just look at the new development areas and get some controls or some guidance for how they could improve the DCPs for new release areas. But as we went through the discussion in understanding the water sensitive city goals, it became very clear that it was actually really important to think about new development, existing urban areas, that urban activity in the town centres, what's happening in individual homes and businesses. So when with dealing with lots of people, and particularly with the COVID, it was really important to sort of take all those people that might have never come across the water sensitive city on a bit of a journey. So what we just did for the Illawarra Shoalhaven, and we were quite tight on time and budget, was to use the goals and the 34 indicators and ask for a pre-workshop survey. So we sent the information out so people could actually, people who might not have been able to attend the benchmarking workshop could actually provide their input ahead of time. And then those people who were attending the workshop had a bit more time to actually think about those indicators and write down some justification. Then we had a briefing session, and as for the process, we had the briefing session for all participants in the workshop, as well as any senior managers who needed to get a bit more of an idea of why this was an important part of their journey. It helped us to set the context, and we had really great attendance, and that was thanks to Emma's really a fantastically passionate operator for someone in Wollongong Council, but for the region as a whole, was able to really understand the importance of getting senior staff to those workshops and just preparing the workshops, the participants for this online world of workshopping. And we're all pretty good at it now, but it still takes a bit of your time to get your head around the logistics of managing 2 screens and managing different tools online. Then again, the benchmarking workshops, where it was setting the context again, we really needed to revise the rules of engagement because it was an online forum. We needed to keep participants active by moving quite quickly through the sessions and encouraging discussion, but keeping things active, and then sharing information in the plenary sessions at the end. We were able to present the findings, well, we'd like to present the findings on the day, but for the Illawarra Shoalhaven with 4 councils in 1 region, we weren't able to get all that information loaded onto the CRC website in time, but we were able to come back to the working group and present them with their preliminary information. So logistics is quite hard when you are working across a region online to get some of those tools happening. So the objectives again on those benchmarking workshops was really a focus on sharing the resources across the region where, you know, in a bigger council, particularly, you know, and Christy will talk about Blacktown, there's a lot of resources in the city councils or the city councils that come together for the workshops, but in the regions, it's quite hard to actually get people to dedicate the time to come to the workshop. So we wanted to make sure that we were really demonstrating how the benchmarking process itself is a springboard for sharing resources, whether it's the human resources, policy resources, knowledge and learning across the region. So what we found is really important for us to collect information to inform priority projects, particularly around capacity building, policy platforms, and just the next steps to get the Illawarra Shoalhaven on the road to their vision for enabling a water sensitive community. It identified a couple of on-ground projects, a lot of enabling projects and approaches. So we got final scores for all 34 indicators and 7 goals. Some of our confidence levels were a little low for the councils because the representation from staff wasn't as high as we had hoped. And then we gathered and refined as much evidence as we could. In this workshop, we actually involved some of the council staff from each of the councils in note-taking as well, so that it meant that we could get slightly more accurate information and being able to check back and confirm what evidence people had. Then we were able to present and discuss the results with the working group and build a much better understanding. So from the final workshop, the working group of representatives across the region were really, really pleased with their outcomes and what they'd actually learned just by going through the process. As I said, one of the things that I've learned a lot over the last 8 months, as I'm sure everybody has, that online platforms, it just really needs a lot of really clear planning, and it's a totally different approach to a workshop where you've got the luxury of standing at the coffee table or getting something to eat and being able to have those dialogue conversations. So we really had to think very carefully about the flow of work and how we were going to get feedback, meaningful feedback from 4 councils and the ISJO as a whole. So we had a really streamlined process of logistics of putting each of the councils into breakout rooms and then bringing them back into the room for the ISJO discussion. So we were moving at a fast pace with 3 to 5 minutes of fast conversation. But it was really good because it got people were not, they were exhausted, but they were not drifting off to sleep. Anyway, we wanted to hear from all participants, so the breakout rooms were really important for everybody to have a chance to have a say. And it meant that we had to have a lot of people on hand to provide that support technically and also in developing through those questions. Just a very quick example of what we did was with these images on the left here were the survey results. So what we did was shared the survey results with the group. These are the scores for some of the, so the first one up the top, it's a bit hard to see, is the Indigenous involvement in water planning. And Shell Harbour, Kiama, Shoalhaven and Wollongong gave their scores, and then the ISJO had the score for them. So that was a prompt for us to discuss those scores and then arrive at an agreed score. So it saved a bit of that online time because people had considered the question beforehand. And then we were able to benchmark off that and provide our final scores. And it also helped to prompt a discussion, especially if there was a spread of examples. For example, Wollongong had somebody who was much more optimistic than the rest of the group in terms of scores, which sometimes always happens, always high scorers and low scorers. Anyway, and then what we were able to do was obviously share the immediate results of the Water Sensitive Cities Index, but we did that as a secondary process and were able to then compare and show them what was happening in other regions and have a look at that. And that again prompts a discussion, and for some people that can be a little bit stressful because they feel their organisation isn't doing as well, but for a lot of other people it's a real motivating factor where you might have a look at, and I'll just jump ahead because you all know what the results do look like. But for example, we were able to share what had happened across the country and across other places where Alluvium has done some work, or the CRC's been doing some work with benchmarking. And then the next slide is some other work that Alluvium did before I started in looking at the Hunter region group of councils and doing their benchmarking scores. I believe that was in the days before COVID, so that was a much more friendly face-to-face workshop activity. And I think that's me, Beth.
Great, thank you, Jan. All right, David, are you back?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
You can?
Yes.
Okay. Yes, I'm back. So I'm on a different platform, so just wait. Sorry.
Thanks, Jan.
Okay.
So can you see my screen?
No.
You can?
No.
Sorry, my technology is having weird issues. Sorry, can you hear me? Because I'm just...
Yep, we can hear you.
You can, okay.
Yep.
I'll go ahead. I've just got feedback in my ear. So you can see my screen?
No, we cannot see your screen.
Okay. You can now?
No.
No.
We can hear you, but we cannot see your screen. Oh, yep, it looks like it's starting to share now. There we go. We can see your screen.
Okay, great.
And we can hear you. Great.
Great. Okay. So, yeah, so I gave just a bit of context in regards to where Hornsby is at. The work that got the water sensitive strategies up and running was our work with the that we needed to inform our Sustainable Hornsby strategy and our local strategic planning statement. This was one of the many studies we did in the last 18 months. At one stage, we were doing up to 15 different strategies and public domain strategies. So there was a lot of work to be done there. I suppose that produced quite a few benefits and a few challenges as well. The benefits is that all the documents talk to each other. Probably the main challenge was the amount of consultation we're doing and the various consultation we had to do, and a bit of consultation sort of overload for the community. In regards to the water sensitive city strategy itself, and the full name is a vision and transition strategy for Hornsby. We engaged the CRC early last year, and I'd like to thank the CRC for the work that they did in helping us through this process, especially Katie Hammer, Malcolm Eadie and Christy Good when she was working for the CRC. We engaged them to look at our long-term water aspirations, do some benchmarking work and explore strategic priorities in the medium to short term. We did this through 4 different modules. Obviously, first of all, the benchmarking, then an envisioning module, a transition planning, and then action development. Just a bit of a background, Hornsby's been doing a little work in this area for quite a long time. We've had an environmental levy called the catchment remediation rates for the last 25 years. It was basically around some catastrophic events in some of our waterways back in the 90s, to an extent where we actually put a moratorium on development, which is pretty astounding when you think about it. So we've been doing work in this space for quite a long time. So we've got numerous devices out in the Shire, up to 400 different devices. We fund maintenance through that rate. We fund community engagement and education. We do a lot of research, so we have a very significant water quality monitoring and eco-health monitoring program, and we fund staffing through that program. So we were in a good place to start with, a relatively good place, but we still had challenges. So obviously around changing government priorities, whether that was state government or internally with our elected members. And we still obviously are dealing with existing and future developments. I think a lot of the time we forget a little bit about existing developments, but that's where all our impact is in Hornsby. We have very little greenfield, and future development is around the infill. And obviously we've got the pressures of climate change to deal with. So we embarked on a workshopping process. We had internally, we undertook 4 workshops. So benchmarking, as we said. We then looked at visioning and narrative building, where we developed a water story and a vision for 50 years. We then explored priorities and strategies to validate these visions and look at prioritize focus areas for a transition. And then we did some action planning. So in regards to the benchmarking, which Jan has just talked about, Hornsby actually came out quite well in the benchmarking. So we went through the process of benchmarking with Alluvium and the CRC, which obviously articulates the 7 goals of water sensitive city and the 34 different indicators. For example, water literacy, leadership, fit for purpose, alternative water sources. That process involved live scoring during the day. We had members from every department of council. We had members from operational all the way to the GM. So we did that benchmarking exercise in a day. And as you can see there in regards to the results, Hornsby's doing pretty well in all aspects up to waterway cities. We've got a lot of improvement around water cycle city. And I think with most of these benchmarking exercises, it's seen that our water sensitiveness has a long way to go. So as I said, we've got a good start point in regards to work we've done in the past, but we have a long way to go. The next workshopping we did was around vision and narrative building. So we did 2 sets of workshopping. We did internal workshopping with up to 35 staff. We did community workshopping as well with a deliberative group, which was picked out of some survey work we did with the Sustainable Hornsby strategy. In hindsight, in a perfect world, we probably would have done a lot more thorough community workshopping, but again, with all the different strategies running at the one time, that was quite problematic. We also had external stakeholders, OEH, Sydney Water, the EPA, involved in these workshops as well. From those initial workshops, we developed a vision for Hornsby. And this vision is very similar to some of the visions we have in the other strategies, like the biodiversity strategy, the urban forest strategy. So that was a good benefit of doing these strategies together. From those visions, we then developed vision themes. So we had 6 vision themes, which were very closely aligned to the goals of a water sensitive city. So around natural environments, beautiful blue and green spaces, empowered communities, a strong focus on water management and safe communities, sustainable resource use, and integrated and inclusive governance. One thing we had the luxury of, we had an artist in-house who was able to visualize some of these visions and vision themes. So that's what the products are there. The next stage was to run the information and the evidence collected from those workshopping through the transition dynamics framework. So these are the steps that we took to basically get from where we are to where we want to be. So initially we looked, and these weren't, the way it's set out here isn't necessarily sequential, but this was the process in the end when we were developing those strategies and actions to progressors and transitioners to that water sensitiveness. So initially we identified practice change. So we looked at issues and what changes needed to be undertaken, and these were discussed at group levels, both internally and with the community. We then mapped the index to themes, so how strategy and actions progress the themes and indicators for a water sensitive city. We then collected evidence for the transitional dynamics framework. So we collected this evidence through the benchmarking processes, through targeted discussions that identified enabling factors. For example, in regards to one of the enabling factors around champions. So we looked at where they were present and where they were missing. Then we obviously applied the transition dynamics framework to the process, and the CRC went through this process. They undertook a traffic light assessment for the enabling factors. And then from there, which is probably the fundamental component of this, they identified priority strategies for each vision theme that would address the missing enabling conditions. And if this was done, what we needed to do to make sure that our practice change actually happened. Then strategies were formulated based on what needs to happen. And I'll go through that process next. So this is, you would have seen this matrix before. Basically, this is the transition dynamics matrix. On the left-hand column, you've got the phases, so the transition phases, and then you have the enabling factors on the top row there. So we worked on each of the vision themes and put those vision themes through this matrix. By doing that, we then we did the traffic light assessment to see where we had some enabling factors present, where they were just present and potentially vulnerable to recession, or where they were completely absent. And from then we went through the process of identifying actions which specifically moved us towards more water sensitive practices. We assumed that where we already have that enabling factor in place, we'll keep doing that, but we put all our focus on actions which will move us to a more water sensitive practice. This is just an example of one of the vision themes, so integrated and inclusive governance arrangements. And this is where we identified specific actions and then tasks which would then transition us forward. So we're obviously very mindful that these actions need to be sequential. We're very mindful of not trying to achieve too much, because quite often we try and go to the end game straight away, and we know that we might get backlash if we do that. In summary, these are This is a summary of the recommended actions. There's 18 different actions with up to 65 different sub-actions or tasks within the strategy. So they're around developing working groups to oversee the implementation of the strategy. So they're both internal and cross-departmental and external. Embeds good practice into policy and planning. Develop new knowledge, leverage on partnerships and develop business cases, and strengthen compliance. But again, a lot of this wasn't done to chance. This was all directed and identified within the workshopping that what needed to be done. Then it was put through as I said, the transition dynamics framework to identify exactly where we needed to do work for us to progress. And that's about it.
Excellent. Thanks, David. We won't have questions now. We'll wait till the end.
Yep.
That's awesome. Thank you very much for that. Christy, good.
Okay, let me see if I can share my screen. Of course, people are starting to talk in the room beside me now. Of course. Okay, can you see my screen yet?
Not yet.
Not yet?
There we go.
Sorry, guys. No?
Yep.
You got tools into practice?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. Look, I'm going to come at it from a slightly different angle, only to the because of the fact that we're actually only partway through this project. So we're actually still working closely with Jan from Mosaic Insights and Fiona Chandler from Alluvium. So we're probably 3/4 of the way through this project, and it was actually quite a big project. Probably to your disappointment, I'm not going to show you our results because a lot of this work actually hasn't been communicated back to our internal staff yet. What our results were, and even where to from here. So I guess I'm trying to find a balance between what I can share with you here online. Obviously, I've got some of my colleagues online as well. And our executive haven't seen the results yet. So as I said, I'm just trying to find what I can share with you. And I'm not going to go through the dynamic framework or the tool because I think both Jan and David have given like a good overview of that. But I guess what I'm going to come at it from the viewpoint of the outputs. What is the output that you want from this body of work? So anyone who's met me in my former role of the CSC regional manager, I think they're fabulous tools. I think the index tool and the transition dynamic framework are great, but and this is why we're having these webinars now. It's like what next? Like how do we actually implement these into reality? What do we do with this information? And being in my current role as the Waterway team leader and working with Libby Cameron, our WUSA capacity building officer, and Jan and Fiona, it's actually fabulous that we actually get to work through the what next. So it's really quite exciting. And I'd be really pleased to come back and circle back once we've actually worked through that process. But for the here and the now, these are the things that I would like to to offer you. I think it's good to have an understanding of how you want to use the outputs of the water sensitive index tool and the transition dynamic framework, but I will put it up front. I think you need to be flexible and probably echoing what David had just said, like the outputs were a result of those workshops and those interactions with the consultants. So you need to be flexible as new information comes to light, where you think you're heading with the outputs or that can change. So I think it's good to have an idea of how you want to use the framework, but also be open to it can change to the point where we've actually got a variation in now. We think that the output, we need to mould the output to be something different to what we thought it would be going into the project. What I find is a key challenge is how you're going to align the recommendations from the index tool and the transition dynamic framework with existing strategy, operational plans, key performance indicators, targets, all those things that are going on in your council. I sit back here and I'm a little bit envious of Hornsby's journey in recognising that they are doing some fabulous work and have been doing for some time. And I think it, as David indicated, is probably an amazing opportunity to actually sit down and look at all of those strategies together. I can't imagine the headache it must have been, but I think there is a real significant opportunity to do it in that sequential context and making sure that all your strategies align. We didn't have that luxury. And I just put this up. In an ideal world, you have your local strategic planning statement above, you'd have your community strategic plan, you'd get your index tools and your transition dynamic framework and the recommendations that come out of that would feed into some form of integrated water strategy or a water sensitive city strategy that would then fold into, well, what are the programs and activities that you need to do on the ground? And then up the other way, you'd have the indicators. So I'm talking the CRC water sensitive index indicators here. So at the basic level, what are those, I think 34 or 36 indicators that we need to keep moving forward? How do we then move goals forward? And then how do they actually then roll out in your community strategic plan? So this is something that I've been, I'm very much about what I'm trying to do in my team, given we have limited resources, as I'm sure most organisations do, is how can we demonstrate that the work that we're doing on the ground is actually going to get us the result that we need? And in this case, it's actually working through those indicators, through the goals. So that would be an ideal world, but the reality is it doesn't always work like that. So in Blacktown Council's case, we had our community strategic plan, which thankfully gave us permission to be moving towards a water sensitive city. My colleagues have done a fabulous job and had actually all but written the integrated water strategy that just got adopted by Council in August. And we also have some pretty good programs that have been quite well embedded and have their own goals, targets. So with the integrated water strategy, we know that it sets a vision. It does, and it goes a long way. It sets a vision for council to help our city move towards the water sensitive city. But we know that it's not everything that we need to do. So there were some gaps that needed to be filled, which is why I wanted to embark on the journey of doing the Water Sensitive Cities Index and the Transition Dynamic Framework. And the other thing, just the difference for your benefit here is we have these key indicators up the top that are aligned with our community strategic plan, but there's not a correlation at the moment between our key indicators and our integrated water strategy or what's coming out of our goals and our indicators. So I'm trying to get my head around how these all fit together. And then on the side here, you've got the enabling factors that I see are the overarching framework, like what is it that we need to do as an organisation to help us move towards this water sensitive city. So we do have a vision for a water sensitive city that's outlined in the integrated water strategy. You know, we want to use water more efficiently. So we're reducing potable water usage. We want to use water to cool our environments. We want to use water, have healthy waterways to protect our biodiversity. And we want to use water to create vibrant precincts. So we had that strategy, that approved strategy. You know, it supports our community strategic plan and it supports all of the visions of Sydney Water's Regional Master Plan and Western Sydney Planning Partnership. But overlay that on top is how do we actually integrate the Water Sensitive Cities Index tool, and the Transition Dynamic Framework. And this is the bit of work that we've been trying to grapple with, because at the end of the day, we sat down with Alluvium and Mosaic Insights and we said, wow, we could have another 50 recommendations that come out of this, but how does it actually fit into the work that we're already doing? So, and this is part of the work that we're still working through, and I can show you some things in a moment, but we just needed to take a step back, and this is not easy, like this is complex, like when and I guess I'm talking from an organisation who are doing things in different orders, and a lot of councils are probably like that. We don't have that nice sequential, you know, get your vision, develop your strategy, and then develop your programs and activities. So this is a reality that we at Blacktown Council are faced with. The reality is we do have lots of programs and activities that we know need tweaking. The recommendations will tell us what it is we need to do to tweak those current activities. The recommendations will also tell us where the gaps are. So our game plan is we need to find out what indicator and goals our current activities are actually contributing to. Okay, because again, the reality is we don't have an open budget to just go out and go, here's 80 recommendations that have come through from this index tool and the Transition Dynamic Framework, and here's resources to implement those. So first step for us is look at the work that we're doing and what indicator and goals are these activities currently contributing to. And this includes our environmental stormwater management program. It includes our all the actions outlined in our integrated water strategy. So then what we need to do is we actually need to tweak these activities to identify what are the activities, what more do we need to be doing with these activities to make sure that we're actually meeting the recommendations in the index tool. So that I believe is our key foundation where we're starting. What do we need to do within our existing resources and budget to implement those recommendations? But notably, and one of the reasons why we did the index tool and the Transition Dynamic Framework is we know that we have gaps. We know that our strategy in its current form is only going to take us so much of the way. So we want to have this long-term, the long-term plan. What is it that we need to be working towards our water sensitive city? So we do want to know that information, but for the here and the now, what are the priority recommendations that are absolutely critical to moving our city forward? So it's almost like is there a sequence of things that we actually need to do? Before you do that, you need to do this. So we need to identify what those ones are. And we need to identify and prioritise the key enabling factors that are needed to shift our goals and our indicators. The next one, number 5, I think is really important. And it's something that we're moving towards in all the work that we do, is we've got such limited funding, and some would say Blacktown Council has quite a lot of funding, but the reality is we actually do have limited funding, and we want to be sure that the work that we're doing on the ground is actually going to be making a difference and helping us meet our targets and goals. So what we're actually doing is mapping back all our activities to where it actually fits, like what indicator and what goal it actually fits. So anyone who's familiar with program logic, this activity, you make this assumption, you do this, this is the changes that you're going to get. So this is very much where we're working with Alluvium and Mosaic Insights to identify, well, what is that scaffolding? If we do this work down here, how do we know in 4 years' time when we go back and do the indicator again, how do we know that we've actually made progress in moving those indicators forward? Those, the rating from whatever X to Y, and then moving the goals. What we're doing now is pulling together all of this information into a water sensitive city transition enabling plan, which is a mouthful, but it is going to be a no-nonsense plan. It's simply going to be a spreadsheet of these are the activities that we're doing. These are how they contribute. These are the ones that contribute to different goals. And these are the different enabling factors that we need to implement to help us implement this particular activity. So I can't do that alone. That's something that to get my head around that, and it has taken a lot of toing and froing with the team at Alluvium, Jan and Fiona, to do that. We're not quite there yet, and it probably will still need a little bit of tweaking. But at the end of the day, what we want to do is make sure that what we get out of the output of the index framework and the transition dynamic framework works for us here at Council. More than happy once we get to that point, and with Alluvium and Mosaic Insight's permission, happy to share where we land on that. But I think it is that next step. It's the next step for us actually in how do we make these recommendations actually work for us on the ground. And I guess the final step there is utilise Council's Water Working Group to drive the implementation of this plan and report progress. So another key challenge for me is we've just had the integrated water strategy developed. It doesn't talk about goals. It doesn't talk about indicators for water sensitive city. So I need to start to introduce and merge the integrated water strategy and showing where there's alignment with our integrated water strategy, and I need our water working group to help drive this across council. I'm just going to stop sharing for a minute, and just to give you an idea, because I know I'm probably talking in riddles here. I just want to share this. This is just bear with me while This is where I'm at, and I was contemplating, do I or don't I share this with people? Will it freak them out? Probably. Freaks me out sometimes. Can you see my screen? Beth, can you see my screen?
No.
Let me try again.
There we go.
Yep. Okay, so this is my first attempt at a program logic, and I have had, I know Beth's going, program logics are close to Beth and my heart. This has been workshopped internally with my team. It still needs some work. If I was to go out to the whole organisation and say, this is what we need to do, I'd probably be fired for a start. But basically what you can see, what I'm keen to show you is that trying to mesh the integrated water strategy with the outcomes of the index tool. So we have our vision up here, but we've got long-term outcomes and short-term outcomes. So what I've mapped is everything that we're doing across council. And so for your benefit, the pink is like our community social, the green is our biophysical space, and if I was to go over here, the blue is our potable water consumption. But if I just focus over here for a moment, so what I'm doing, what I'm working towards is long-term outcomes have targets in our integrated water strategy, but we also have targets that we want to work on in terms of the index tool. So they're our goals. The water sensitive city 1, 2, 5, they relate to the goals. Then the short to medium outcomes relate to specific indicators. What I've had to do at the moment, that middle bit is our operational focus goals. So what you'll see is they're not neatly aligned at the moment. So I've actually got a bit of work strategically to try and get the organisation to be in better alignment. But what you can see down the bottom is I've mapped out all of the programs that we have across council that are contributing to this. So it is really complex. I would say, if I could do it again, I would say not do strategy first, do probably in the way that Hornsby Council have done it, but sometimes that's not the reality of what we're faced with. Like, there's lots of good work and we go on this journey, but sometimes we have to stop and go, okay, well, where to from here? And that's very much where we're at the moment. Look, just finally, just jumping back down into what did we learn about the process. Scale is really important to consider, and I say that having been involved in the Greater Sydney, so I'm just going to share my screen again and finish up with this. Can you see my screen yet, Beth?
Not yet.
It's not very...
Yeah, it's working.
Yeah, okay. So, sorry guys, it's just clunky jumping in and out of... Okay. Yeah, scale is important to consider, and again, I say that from having participated in the Greater Sydney index tool that we did a couple of years back. Jan can probably attest to this and is probably better placed about scale, but it is important. You know, we effectively took it on as a Blacktown Council project, but we obviously had to get... Blacktown Council isn't responsible for implementing a water sensitive city across our city. We're a key player, but we're not the only player. Maybe a Western Sydney is a good scale. I don't know, but I think it's good to have those discussions about scale and what buy-in. So utilities and state government involvement is really important. And look, we did have some fabulous feedback and input from the likes of Sydney Water. But you can also imagine a organisation like Sydney Water to have 3 or 4 people who can be across everything that's happening in that space perhaps isn't a reflective picture, which is why I'm talking scale. Maybe it needs to be at a bigger scale. To do it well, there is a considerable time commitment from staff and from others outside. So you need to be come from a place where people are committed, and you've probably got some direction and buy-in from directors that give you that mandate that people do need to be involved in this process. I think the virtual worked okay, and credit to Jan and Fiona and Richard, we were the first ones, I believe, that they did in Australia in a virtual platform. So I think virtual does work okay if you're trying to keep costs down and not have to fly people interstate. But I think there is significant value, as Jan alluded to, actually having people in that room, having those informal conversations. Perhaps the facilitators could do it remotely, maybe, but I do think that having people in together is a better way to do it. And just finally, again, I think we just need to be flexible and work with our consultants to ensure that the final output allows for meaningful integration into existing business strategies, programs and processes. So keep that open mind as to what that end product might look like. And that is it from me.
Excellent. Thank you, Christy. That was very good. And we'll just jump to Liam now. And I have Liam's PowerPoint. So I will share my screen.
Very good, Beth. Just, are we continuing beyond 1:30, I'm presuming?
Yep.
Okay, good. Very good. Thanks, Beth. Wonderful. So yeah, I'm Liam Sibley from the City of Greater Bendigo. before I introduce my formal role, I describe myself as a father, water lover, and a gardener. That sort of grounds me in who I am and all the work I like to get involved in. I suppose my role is Senior Water Strategy Officer in the City of Greater Bendigo, and I basically inherited a vision and transition strategy. And I, essentially have to coordinate the implementation, amongst other things. So it's it's really exciting, and I inherited all the good work of people like Katie Hammer and Emma Church and Ryan Rogers and a few others. So yeah, it's been an interesting journey over the last 2 years of how we go from a strategy into where we are today. Just to give you a little bit about context of Bendigo, we're south of the border, if you're not aware, New South Wales, and we are a city of about 100,000 people. And back in the Millennium Drought, Bendigo was faced with some really serious water security challenges. Had day zero was about 100 days away, and there was stage 4 restrictions, which was pretty significant restrictions on water use. And there was a large intervention to try to get water to Bendigo so they didn't run out of water. So that sort of bought us some time, but it hasn't finished where we need to get to with becoming a water sensitive city. We're projected to reduce our rainfall by about 1/3, but our population is expected to double. So, in anyone's mind that, we don't have enough water to go around, essentially. So we're going to have to get pretty innovative. So we're very fortunate that the CRC did a great job in bringing all parties together and developed a vision and transition strategy. And you'll see the vision below, where Bendigo is a thriving inland city, where water innovation supports healthy people, green environments, and resilient systems. I think we'll all agree that, these are really important goals that could be applied anywhere in Australia, really, or the world for that matter. So next slide, please. One back here. So the old question of how do you transition to a water sensitive city when there's so much complexity, uncertainty, and I think, in the 2020, we really realized how uncertain the world is, but also how complex our world is today as well, where there's so many interconnections. And I like to draw the analogy of, how do we do it? It's very much a braided stream. There's no one course, and you'll be constantly adapting your path along the way, because, you might have an overall direction where you want to go, but how you get there is going to meander all over the place, and it'll come in floods, and then it'll dry out, and then it'll keep coming back. So just keep that in mind. There's no one way to do this, but it's just a way of conceptualizing the journey. Next slide, please. I suppose one thing that you really need is a water gang to get you through this. You can't do it alone. No local government or any water authority for that matter can do this alone. It takes a diversity of stakeholders to come together and commit to making this vision happen. And I think, whether it be urban livability, ecosystem function, or water security, all of that require many, many parties together. And I suppose with Bendigo's Water Gang, we've sort of assembled a gang involving some terrific people. But first and foremost is the Djadjurrung. They've been a really key leader in this space. The Djadjurrung are the traditional owners of Bendigo, and they remind us that we need to remember that water has murup, which is spirit, and we need to respect that spirit and look after it so that it can give back health to us. Then there's, of course, your water authority that gives you technical know-how, but also, have they also own all the assets, critical for bringing along the way. And then you've got your local decision makers and Mayor Quimby and the like. Obviously, local government is a key player in this, and I see local government as a coordinating body, but also a key decision maker that the community will look for direction and influence. And of course, you need some environmental champions. We've got in Victoria catchment management authorities, and they're really important to have, reminding that this is not just about technical solutions, but it's also about looking after ecosystem services. Then you need the big end of town, someone with the bag of money and a bit of influence at the top end. And we're state government is usually who that is. It can be other people, but we've got the Department of Environment, Land, Water and Planning in Victoria, which essentially they hold the purse strings. So it's critical that they're along the journey because these things cost lots of money and over a long period of time. Then you also need you need research, and the CRC is providing that function for us, and they've given us some great tools and research. So it's really nice working alongside people like Jamie and others to access that research and how it can be applied. Then you also need the health sector. We've got the Department of Health involved here, and it's, they're still learning out how they fit in this, but at least they're coming on the journey. Their role is still sort of in the background, but over time this will, hopefully evolve into where we can bridge water and urban health and public health initiatives together. And then for anyone in the Murray-Darling Basin, which Bendigo is, you'll need a bit of a water wizard. I think it's water's scarce, and it's only going to be getting more and more competition. So we're going to have to get pretty creative, or if not magical, about how we use our water. And then lastly, it's a bit of a gang, and this is of community members. And these are people that can energise you and give you, I suppose, drive innovation and challenge you to think differently about how things can be done. So that's roughly about what the gang looks like in a sort of a pictorial sense. But, it's just, remember the diversity is key to this. Local government, it's not just local government's role or a water authority. You need everyone at the table. Next slide, please, Beth. So I'm just going to give you a bit of an overview of some of the mechanics with how Bendigo have approached it. So since we got the strategy developed, we've gone off and done a few things. And the first key part was developing a memorandum of understanding between 9 organisations. This was essentially just establishing commitment to make sure that we could keep working on this together. And this was signed by 9 organisations. Within that MOU, we sort of defined some roles and responsibilities as well. One of the key ones is a coordinating position, which is me, to basically just bring together the working group and organise, make sure that we keep progressing things. We also made sure that we needed a chair, and this was something we did in retrospect. Now, we did the first year without a chair, but we realised we didn't have any executive buy-in. And earlier this year, we appointed a chair, which was Rodney Carter from the Dja Dja Wurrung. So we've got a traditional owner leading the process, and he's given it a whole lot of energy. And it's really lovely working alongside him as we sort of navigate this path. I suppose one of the key parts as well is a cross-agency working group. We meet on a monthly basis and just work on projects and actions to progress this. And this includes representation from those 9 organisations. And the participation varies between organisations. You've got some really committed, and then there's some that just don't have the time to do it yet. But it's important that we just keep bringing them along. One of the key functions of this group is an implementation plan. And this is really just to translate the strategy, which has, I think we had 100-odd actions in there, into something that's a bit more manageable over the first 3 years. And that's just really trying to utilise current staff and current projects to best effect to achieve multiple outcomes. And then we've recently tacked on a Reimagining Bendigo Creek implementation group. Reimagining Bendigo Creek's a renaturalisation project we're all working on together. And this is just a focal project that can help build some momentum. And this is just a very specific group that is responsible for overseeing that particular plan. And then lastly, we've got our network of champions, which is an informal group, but just, we allow developers, consultants, and other agency staff and community members to come together to talk about, water matters. Admittedly, in the year of COVID, it's been hard doing the network, but we do want to re-establish it in 2021. All right, next slide, please. So we've all talked about the transition dynamics framework today, and I'm not going to labour it too much, but I suppose one thing to highlight is, for Bendigo, we've sort of designed our implementation plan around this beast, and really focusing on those yellow squares, because this is sort of the halfway house where you can go from being not a bad, a bad city to a really amazing city, or a water sensitive city, I should say. And it's really just focusing on these areas. And we've, one, developed actions to sort of advance these things, but two, we've also designed our monitoring and evaluation framework around these. So I've got key indicators to view if we're making progress or we're going backwards. Yeah, so next slide, please. But I suppose, what does this really mean when you use these things? I think the sandpit analogy is what you can look at the transition dynamics framework. Hopefully Bryony and others don't get too offended by this, but it's essentially, you want to create a safe space where you can play, build and learn. And it's really just about experimenting. There's no correct answer. You just got to keep having a crack. Some things will come off and then some things won't. It doesn't really matter. Just keep having a go and, learning along from those experiences. Next slide. So what's next along our journey? We're going to continue to learn how to collaborate amongst our 9 organisations. Collaboration is not an easy game, particularly when you bring a whole lot of genders together and different organisational priorities. But I suppose one of the key things we've learnt from us is utilise your annual review processes to bring people together. We're able to drive some significant improvements, like bringing in a new chair for our partnership, as well as also having improved governance arrangements, just by bringing everyone together through an annual review process. So make sure you're constantly reviewing how the partnership's working, because you're not going to get it right first time, but it's an evolution. We've got a couple of water sensitive urban design projects in the mix, and we're getting close to implementation stage. And that would just be really nice to showcase, well, what does this strategy actually mean, if we can have some on-ground examples. And then thirdly, we're building momentum around reimagining Bendigo Creek. And, we've developed a long-term plan for this, but now it's about getting action on the ground. And one of the key parts is getting investment. And we've been advocating really hard through developing a prospectus to state government to see if they can give us some money. And this has been actually a really good opportunity to bring executives together to actually advocate to the higher levels of government and say, yep, we need money to make this work. So it's just, giving executives a problem to work through can sometimes be a good way to get collaboration at those higher levels. And then lastly, we really need to find good ways to get the network of champions to really drive innovation. We're getting them to come along to meetings and a few things like that, but to get them to go to the next step is going to be a really interesting one. We've been fortunate to have a leadership program where there's been 2 teams joined from the Water Sensitive Bendigo network, and they're trying to develop their leadership, but also do projects that can drive some change. So we'll try and nurture that the best we can, but there's also lots of other ways we're going to learn how to mobilise our champions. So that's about it for me, and I'll hand it over to you. So, and thanks everyone for hanging on. Hopefully you're still a few around. It's been a little bit over time, but look forward to having a chat if anyone's got questions.
Great. Thank you very much, Liam. All right, and thank you to all of our speakers. I might just share my screen again very quickly, just to promote our next, our next webinar. So we have the 2 more before Christmas. The next week is on street tree guidelines, and then the ones after that, one after that's on the Infuse, which is the cost benefit analysis tool. So the same link that you use to register for this one should also allow you to register for the other ones as well. All right, so that's it. Thank you very much, everyone, for coming.